Welcome to this week's episode of Beyond the Script. I am your host, Nikki Lynn Mayo, and we are going to talk about identity protection and what that looks like, how it moves you, through uncertainty, through what if thoughts, identity loops, all kinds of things like that. I'm going to break it all down today so that you can actually move forward in life and not keep repeating same scenarios that are sabotaging you and sabotaging your success. So, I want you to think for a second, ask yourself how much of your life is actually designed to protect who you think you are. Now, I don't expect you to have an answer right now because that's what's going to unfold as we discuss this further. But think about that. Think about that as we go through the episode. How much of your life is actually designed to protect who you think you are, okay? Recently, I have been writing a lot about identity. As we know, that is, my angle, identity and intuition. However, they're all connected. Identity, intuition, self-sabotage, ego, relationship, success, fear of the unknown. These are not all separate conversations because it all comes back to one thing, which is your identity. And identity is very simply, this is who I am, right? This is who I believe that I am. And we carry around different identities. We carry around, the daughter identity, the oldest daughter identity, the wife identity, the mother identity, the aunt identity, the working identity, the emotional side of it, the strong identity, the independent identity, and so on and so forth. So we have all of these things and labels that we believe that we are. But with this, your identity can also create what I'll call an invisible set of rules, right? So, because we hold so strongly to certain identities, this can actually affect what we believe, what we consider possible for ourselves, the information that we're willing to accept about ourselves, how we interpret other people's behavior, especially if it's attacking an identity that we're holding on to so strongly, and then what you actually allow yourself to have and who you allow yourself to become through this process. So, the whole episode today is not going to be about changing your identity. We're not discussing that, but we are going to talk about recognizing when you are protecting an identity that doesn't necessarily need to be protected anymore. So, identity protection is the tendency to defend the story you understand about yourself when new information threatens it. Okay. Naturally, we want our reality to make sense. We want our reality to make sense to us. We want to believe it, right? So I'll give a very simple one. If I believe I'm a good person, and then somebody comes along and says, like, you hurt me, or you're not a good person, or you're actually a piece of shit, or whatever it is, right? Something like that can feel like more than, a type of feedback or more than somebody expressing themselves and how you made them feel. If you are so tied to holding on to that identity, your subconscious is going to register as, the person that I believe myself to be is being threatened. And so this is where the choice comes in, right? So you can have the choice to believe two truths, which is always, in my opinion, the best route to go, where you can think to yourself, you know what, maybe I am a good person who's also hurt somebody. Maybe there is something here that I need to understand about how I delivered XYZ, right? Or how I responded to XYZ. Maybe a part of my perception was wrong. So this would be like the healed, that I'm willing to understand more, I'm willing to dive deeper approach, right? Or you're going to protect the identity tooth and nail, right? You're going to accuse and project onto the other person. So this is where people come in and they're like, oh, they're dramatic, they misunderstood me, they're lying, everyone always attacks me, right? These are the different types of responses that protect the identity that we are trying to hold on to. I wrote an article recently that really goes into identity protection from the perspective of the parent. I think I wrote this a couple weeks ago. It's over on my Substack. You can find me on Substack at Nikki Lynn Mayo. But anyways, I wrote about the article from the perspective of the child, because I'm the child, of the parent, when the parent, is so strongly on protecting an identity that they would actually rather lose an entire relationship than be willing to see that, hey, maybe that identity is not, serving them. Maybe that identity is not exactly what they think it is, right? And this is how powerful that identity protection actually is, where it can cause people, and we all know people like this, it can cause people to be so set in believing they are a certain way that anything that threatens that, they have to remove themselves from it. They have to cut it off. They have to attack it, right? And so that was the premise of my article was about parents who are stuck in like a victim identity, right? When they are actually painted as the villain and having to face the truth of the harm that they've caused, some of them would rather retreat. Some of them would rather cut off contact with their children. Some of them would rather not even go down the road of repair because the identity that needs protection is so strong. Okay. Now, that was an example that was like, like I said, the villain identity, which is, or I'm sorry, the victim identity, which is, something people don't necessarily want to face. But identity protection, the thing I want you to understand, it's not always ugly. It's not always, as ugly as the victim or as, just sad, for lack of a better term, as a victim. Okay. Sometimes identity protection it can be what we perceive to be a positive thing, right? I'm the independent one. I'm the strong one. I'm a good mom. I'm responsible. I'm smart. I'm successful. I'm the successful one, right? I'm the successful one in my friends group. It can also be things that are perceived as not as positive, right? I'm always struggling. I'm just unlucky. I'm really bad with money. I'm not a salesperson. I'm introverted. I can't be extroverted. um I'm the person that everyone depends on. I'm the caretaker. I'm the black sheep, right? These are all different identities that we protect. And if you listen to that list that I just listed off, some of them do sound empowering. I'm the strong one and I'm independent. For some, that's very empowering. That was me, right? I still hold on to those identities. And some can sound limiting, right? Some, I'm unlucky. I'm bad with money. I'm not a salesperson. Those can sound limiting, you know, when heard by somebody else. But the point here, whether they sound empowering or whether they sound limiting, both of these can become cages, and both of these can actually determine how we respond and how we react depending on how strongly we feel the need to protect them. Okay. An identity does not have to make you miserable to limit you. Sometimes it's the identities that we're proudest of that are the hardest ones to release, because again, going back to the article I wrote from the perception of the identity of the victim, it's the same thing where it's like, if I'm not the victim, then who am I? But it's the same thing with the empowering ones. If I'm not independent, who am I? Receiving help can feel like a threat because it's threatening the independent identity. This is one that I actually really struggled with. I didn't see it as a problem, and I still kind of don't see it as a problem. But it is one where one thing, and this is like notorious among oldest daughters, like, oh no, I don't need any help, right? We see that all over social media. The other one that sounds good but can also be limiting is I'm responsible. So of course we want to be responsible, but then the flip side of that is being so overly responsible that we never take any meaningful risk because it feels irresponsible. Well, that's how we are so strongly protecting the identity of I'm responsible, right? The I'm strong identity. It feels great until we are put in a situation where we actually admit to ourselves like, hey, I can't do this anymore. And then that feels like weakness. And that's what keeps us in places that we don't belong in anymore, because we feel we have to just stay strong the whole time. Okay. And what's interesting about this, and this is going to tie into another article that I actually just wrote yesterday, is this is where the idea of intuition and what if starts to enter the conversation, okay? Because we have these thoughts, and we have these thoughts that come up, and it's like, well, what if I did this? What if I wasn't that, right? And what I've come to find in my own journey, this year's been very interesting to say the least. But what I've come to find in my own journey is sometimes what if is the identity that's determining which possibilities are you even willing to investigate. What if I ask for help? Right? That is your intuition giving you curiosity to try to see a different way, to try to, experience a different style of that identity, right? To try to show that there's a different way to do things. We don't have to so heavily protect the one identity. Okay. And so when we look at the what if, when we think about those thoughts of what if, it comes into, every what if, it, like I said, it is intuition, but it's not always telling you exactly what needs to happen. It is letting you know that, hey, there's something else that we can explore here. We don't have to be so hell bent on doing it this way. We don't have to be so hell bent on this belief. We can actually kind of, we can look into it a different way, right? And so when we protect the identity and the what if comes up, it can be two ways. I gave this example yesterday about, when I started having thoughts about my father, and I was like, I would have these little intuitive downloads. I was like, what if your dad's not your biological dad, right? And it was so subtle, but because that threatened my identity so strongly, I really was like, no, that's not possible. You know what I mean? Even though deep down, I had like these wonders, these curiosities, but because my identity was so rooted in that, to me, there was no way that that was possible. But my intuition was trying to give me some answers. Okay. And it doesn't have to be as extreme as my situation. It can be very subtle. What if I'm meant to quit this job? What if this is not the work I'm supposed to be doing? What if this is not the marriage for me? What if I'm supposed to be single? What if I'm, supposed to build a business? What if I'm supposed to be speaking on stages? You see what I mean? Like, there's a lot of different what ifs. What if I actually can do something? What if I am wrong? That comes up sometimes. What if I am in the wrong, right? And that, for people who have to always be right, that would threaten that identity. Okay. And so when that happens, when the what ifs creep in, the identity protection comes in the same way it did around, my biological dad. Was like, absolutely not. There's no way, because it doesn't allow you to threaten the identity. Okay. If you continue, and this work, I'll never paint the picture that, going on a journey of self-discovery is a walk in the park, because it's not. It doesn't have to be, tears and painful all the time, but it's absolutely not a walk in the park, because you have to dismantle everything that you thought you were. And so identity protection, we're going to hear what if, and then identity protection is going to go, nope, absolutely not. And it's going to create a story. It's going to create a story as to why that's wrong. But my challenge to you is, what if you actually, here's that what if you actually got curious about why something was coming up intuitively? And the intuition is different than the thoughts. Okay. We have thoughts all the time that I personally believe don't always belong to us, because we will have low vibrational thoughts and we're like, where the heck did that come from? I don't even really think that. And then, I had a mentor one time and we were talking about thoughts, and she was just like telling me, and I think I've talked about this before, but she was like, yeah, she's like, sometimes, Nikki, I'll be like, no, I need a more elevated thought, please. And I was like, I love that. I'm going to do that. Right. But there's a difference between when you think something and when you feel something. And that's the intuition, is the feeling, right? But the brain can also be so powerful to make you think that an intuitive what if is actually just a thought that you had, because that's what my brain was doing. As intuitive as I am, that's exactly what my brain was doing to protect the identity. Okay. And this will happen. It's not because it's not because, we distrust our intuition. It's that we dislike what listening to it would require. And so, and especially if you have an identity to protect. And that's exactly what was going on with me. It wasn't that I wasn't intuitive. It wasn't that I didn't believe in my intuition. It wasn't any of that. It was that what my intuition was asking me to go explore was such a threat to my identity that there was no way in hell that I was going to go get curious about that. And so I would tune it out. I would tell it it's just my thoughts. I would do all of these things, right? And so this is a key thing that I had to learn this year, is that sometimes your intuition is going to contradict your identity, because your intuition is guiding you through truth. It's guiding you through where you are meant to go. It's letting you know this is the journey and this is the path. We hear it all the time. Trust your gut instinct, trust your gut instinct. And your gut instinct is your intuition. And what's interesting is you will hear people say, well, what if, oh dang, I lost the phrase, but something along the lines of like, well, what if my gut instinct is wrong, or what if my gut instinct is conflicting, or whatever. The reason it's conflicting is not because it's wrong, it's because it's contradicting the identity that you are holding on to. Okay, you might intuitively know this marriage has run its course. I don't want this career anymore. This business direction isn't right. I actually do want something bigger. The story I believed isn't completely accurate. You might believe these things, but when we break them down piece by piece, which I'm about to by an identity standpoint, the reason that you're not following through is because your identity is so trapped. So let's look at the relationship one. Let's think of it. Let's think of it from the perspective of marriage, right? This marriage has run its course. I'm unhappy. There's no fixing it. But your identity is so tied to being a wife. You've always wanted to be a wife. Some have always wanted to be a wife and a mother, right? Well, now you finally have it. Now you're in that identity, or maybe you've been in that identity for several years. And so breaking out of that threatens your identity. So you'll find more reasons to stay. You'll find more reasons to make it work. You'll find more reasons to try, because staying in the in the familiar cycle of chaos is more comfortable to your identity than breaking out into the unknown and having to release that identity for a while. Same thing with the career. I don't want this career anymore. But your identity is so tied to being the corporate baddie, being the high achiever, that stepping away from that threatens who you've built yourself up to be. And sometimes it's not even who you've built yourself up to be. If you were praised as a child for always being successful, the identity runs even deeper. Let's say you did really good at school, you got a great career, you hate your career. Well, your identity is tied back to childhood, that like you have to be the successful one. You're the one who's going to, get your family out of poverty, whatever it is, right? And so now you have to play that part. If you were a caretaker in childhood, if you were always taking care of others, and then you wanted to get married and become a wife, and then you become a wife and you're still a caretaker and you really, enjoy that or whatever, well, again, the identity is going to be threatened, because if you're then you don't have anybody to take care of if you leave that marriage, right? So the problem is not hearing your intuition. The problem is accepting what becomes necessary if it's true. And that is the protection. Excuse me, the identity protection. Because your brain is going to go, well, if that's true, then what? Then what is next, right? And it is in the unknown that the protection gets allowed. When we don't know what is next, we run back to what is familiar, even if it's not working. Why do you think that people who try to get sober and, do a little bit and then go back and then do a little bit and go back and do a little bit and go back? It's because the unknown is challenging, right? The unknown is very hard. And so your identity has to protect what is familiar, even if it's causing you chaos. And if you grew up in chaos, you have to break out of chaos being familiar. And that is a challenging thing to do. And that will come from, I'm getting off topic, off track here, but that will come from deciding what you don't want anymore. When you really decide that you don't want certain behaviors anymore, the unknown is not so bad, because you're like, well, I can't go back there because I'm sick of that lifestyle. So I'm going to take into the unknown and figure out where that is. And that's actually how you break out of your identity protection, is you get so sick of protecting it. But anyways, the unknown is where identity protection gets allowed. So for someone heavily identified as the victim, if I'm not the victim, then who am I, right? If I'm not the victim and I might be the villain, well, that's a huge threat, right? If I'm not struggling, well, who am I? If I'm not constantly complaining about how there's no money in my bank account, well, then who am I? How am I going to connect with people, right? Identity protection also comes from connection. We connect with the same type of identities that we are holding on to. If I'm not married, if I'm not a wife, well, who am I? I've never been just a person, right? If I'm not working this career, who am I? There's so many unknowns that come from who am I? But the beauty is you get to declare exactly who you are if you would allow your identity to stop protected, if you would allow your identity to stop being protected, the one that's not even serving you anymore. If you would allow yourself to explore that, you get to declare exactly who you are. Okay? And so when identity protection gets to the point of overprotecting, it can also look like self-sabotage. And I just wrote another article on this one actually. This was my, you got what I believe I titled it, You Got What You Prayed For, and then got rid of it or something like that, right? It's on my Substack. But anyways, and so identity protection can actually be the cause of your self-sabotage because let me give you an example. You have been praying for money, right? More money, more money. God, please just give me some money, and you finally get the money. The money comes, you wanted the money, right? So the money comes, you're like, okay, here's your answered prayer. Here's the money. It either comes, a random check that you didn't know was coming. It comes as what the heck is the word? A pay increase, Jesus. It comes as a pay increase. It comes as, a new job opportunity. However it comes, a client, whatever, right? The money has arrived. And it's like you've got the money. Now what? Well, your old identity is trapped and protecting the example I gave earlier, which is like, well, if I'm not complaining about money, then who am I, right? Like, it's protecting that scarcity, the scarcity identity. And so, right when the money comes, what do? Let's say you get a job, you get a pay raise. Well, then you start spending more. So you're back to exactly where you were. Or you get a check and you spend it all at once on like things that you really didn't even need, right? Just to get rid of it. And that's because your identity is protecting yourself to sabotage it. You want to have a successful business, but then the customers arrive, your clients arrive, and now you are overwhelmed, you're inconsistent, you're disappearing, you're changing the offers because you haven't actually stepped into the identity of successful business. You are still protecting the identity of the struggling business owner. Okay? You wanted the relationship, it becomes healthy. You're like, I really want a healthy relationship. I want a healthy marriage, but you're used to toxic cycles. Well, it becomes healthy, and now you're looking for what's wrong. Now you are trying to figure out, like, you're creating the chaos because your identity needs the chaos. We can go on and on with so many examples of these, but this is what the identity loop is. And if somebody threatens it, they retreat. When it came to the victim article that I wrote, once I threatened, like, hey, actually, you're not the victim here, that destroyed the identity and they had to remove themselves, right? They had to go and run away. Your identity protection is why you do the things you do. The identity loop is how it keeps playing out behaviorally. So you protect the protection is, this is why I do XYZ. The loop is when you want to stop doing XYZ and you make a little bit of progress doing something different into your I'll call it new identity for lack of a better term. You make progress into your new identity, and then the old identity that needs protection comes knocking. And so you go back to protect that identity. And that's how you end up in a loop, because now you are trying to be two conflicting things at the same time. Your identity is saying, we know how to be this person. We're going to stay as this person. But you have another one. Your intuition is saying, yeah, but what if we were this person? What if we did this, right? And so now you have two conflicting pathways. You have two conflicting identities, and you have to essentially starve the old one, even when it's uncomfortable. Okay. You have to allow the old one to have served its purpose to get you to this one. If you want growth, if you want change, if you want to move forward in anything, you have to be willing to release the things that are keeping you in a loop, that are keeping you in old patterns, okay? Because identity protection, it's not always about holding on to pain. It doesn't have to be painful. Like I said, holding on to like the I'm independent, I'm strong, like that's not really painful. That's like that can be perceived as empowerment. But sometimes doing that, we're protecting ourselves from becoming more because we're afraid of becoming more. We don't know what more looks like. If we've held on to everybody's responsibilities for our whole life and we've been the responsible one, and maybe we're a little burnt out for being the responsible one, but we actually want more in life, well, that can challenge the identity into thinking like, yeah, yeah, but more equals more responsibility, so I'm just going to stay right here. We don't even know if that's true. We've never been over there. We're just projecting, right? And so, excuse me, what if in all of this, you're protecting yourself from the identity you actually want? And that's why you're miserable, because you don't want the identity you're in. You want the next one. Okay. But you have to lose the familiarity of the identity you're in right now, because your next identity, she probably makes more money, she has more boundaries, she doesn't explain herself constantly, she's full of trust, she trusts herself, she leaves relationships behind, she's visible, she makes decisions faster. She doesn't need everyone's approval, right? She can admit when she's wrong. She changes her mind without explanation. She follows her intuition before there's proof. And at the same time, that is scary because it's not familiar right now. You haven't done these things consistently. Okay, you have evidence for what it's like when you don't have boundaries. You have evidence for the money that you have. You have evidence of over explaining yourself, right? But you don't have evidence of this new one. And so it's going to be uncomfortable, especially if you're a people pleaser. That's going to be uncomfortable because now your boundaries in your mind are affecting others, but that's not really your problem. So you don't have any evidence for your new one. You have to create the evidence. Okay, you have to create the evidence for your new one by taking little actions every day that are going to help your new identity to flourish. Okay, so to wrap this whole thing up, how do you know you're protecting an identity? I'm going to give you a couple questions, and you can pause this, you can journal on this, whatever it is, so that you can actually, uncover some things about yourself. So the first question to ask yourself is, what about myself do I feel an immediate need to defend? For me, in most recent events, it was anytime somebody was like, I don't think that's your real dad, or I don't think that's your full blood sister, and we were just, yes, it is, 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 right? Like I was defending that um, until doomsday, so to speak. I even made like, um, my dad and I, like, he's got like we call it a little eye. It's really not that little. You have to like look hard to tell. But yeah, we would both even, I got the same little eye, things like that. I don't think we do. Anyways, next question. What criticism makes me disproportionately angry? What is something you hear that absolutely triggers the fuck out of you? Okay. That you perceive as criticism, that you perceive as, somebody attacking you. What is that? What possibilities do I immediately dismiss? Do you immediately dismiss the idea that you could ever be rich? Do you immediately dismiss the idea that you can get good at sales? Do you immediately, like, what do you immediately dismiss, right? What if keeps returning that I refuse to explore? Only you know this answer, because it's coming in your mind, in your intuition, right? What if keeps returning that I refuse to explore? Where am I repeating the same outcome despite consciously wanting something different? I wanted to get out of corporate so damn bad and do my business full time. So bad. And let me tell you something, and this is embarrassing, but I'm gonna tell you. When I got out of corporate, I started looking for more corporate jobs. I had to pull myself out of that and be like, Nikki, what are you doing? This is exactly what you prayed for, and you are about to repeat the same outcome, knowing what the pattern is, right? So think about that for yourself. And then the last one, what would I have to admit if I stopped blaming everyone else involved? This is big, especially if you are someone who puts others' needs first, right? It's so easy to blame somebody else for why we don't have something, or why we can't do something. But if you stop blaming everybody else, what would you have to admit? That is actually where your self-sabotage is, and it's going to come from an identity. Okay? And so, as you write on those, or now you've written on those, or you're coming back to those later, the last thing that I will say is identity. your is identity evolution is going to require your self-trust, okay? You do not need to know exactly who you're about to become before releasing who you've been. You just have to get comfortable with the unknown, okay? This is where self-trust is going to enter, okay? Because identity work, maybe it's not constantly trying to decide who you're going to become, but it's trusting yourself enough to let your identity evolve when life gives you new information. And life is always trying to give you new information. Okay? It's me new information about yourself, new information about other people, new desires, new circumstances, new intuition nudges, new evidence. And instead of forcing all of that through the filter of like, but this is who I am, start to ask yourself, is that still who I am? Maybe it's who you were now. Okay, maybe it's not who you are anymore. So to wrap it all up, as I've said that like 3 times now, identity protection is what's keeping the old story alive. Intuition is there to question the story, and your identity loops are recreating the story. But it's self trust that's going to give you the permission to write a new one. It's your ability to trust yourself through the unknown and trust the process that's going to finally allow you to step into the identity that you are wanting to step into. Okay. So, the last question I'm going to end with for you is, what are you protecting yourself from becoming? Thank you all for listening to this episode. If you want to connect with me, my social media handles are at Nikki Lynn Mayo. I am active on Instagram, Facebook, and Substack. I'm coming back to TikTok, so you can follow me over there. But yes, if this episode was helpful, share it with somebody who you feel is in a little self-sabotaging loop and maybe needs a little push, a little kick, a little explanation. Share it out with your friends. And like I said, connect with me on socials. I will be here for you all next week with a new episode of Beyond the Script.